welcome everyone to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's guest is a wonderful repeat guest who I am so grateful and honored and blessed to have back on again. And I could, cover her intro again, but, you know, it's on the other episode. So I think this time, Geraldine, we should just jump right into it. And
Yeah.
so I give you the one, the only epigenetic extraordinaire, Geraldine Orozco.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's such a joy to be here, always.
I'm grateful, and I am so excited because I know we talked about topics, and I was going over the topics that we shared, and I don't think we've talked about these before. So I am super excited to jump right in.
Nice. Let's do this.
So where would you like to start?
It's up to you. I forget the topics that we kind of talked about, we threw around. Maybe we could just you can let me know where you want to start. I'm happy to jump into any of those or
Well,
whatever else.
we'll start at the top then and work our way down. So, the first one that we had talked about was the spiritual biology alchemy.
hmm Yeah. So I guess what is it? What do you do? What is it? Is that yeah. Yeah.
What
So
is it and how does it work?
yeah. Well, I'm Geraldine Orozco. I'm an epigenetic psychotherapist, as you know, and I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist. So I came into this work by first kind of testing every possible modality to try to understand how we function, basically, how our emotions function, how our multidimensional body functions. And when in 2013, I went into a retreat for about 4 months. And in those 4 months, I was meditating every single day, maybe up to 9 hours a day. It was just nonstop. And I was so deeply following emotional pathways and discovering what I discovered is that the emotions allowed me to uncover memory in the body. And I found that very fascinating because I could remember every single thing I remember from now until my childhood. I remember every single day of my life. I remember everything I did from morning to night. I remember the way that I felt because it was through the emotional body that I began to recover those memories. And as a result of that deep work, I ended up having this incredible interdimensional experience in October, which is the fourth month of those 4 months that I was in retreat. And as a result of that experience, it activated a complete opening. I was already opening my psychic abilities through the meditation, but after that experience, it just everything opened to the point where I couldn't even leave my house for like 3 months. I could hear conversations with my neighbors 3 houses down in the kitchen talking. I could see through walls. I could feel everything. So during that time, I couldn't really go out too much. I began to get curious. How is it to look inside the multidimensional body? What does it look like when we use this gift, this ability to see what we look like? How do you correlate meditation, emotional work with this multidimensional vision? And what I did during those next 5 months was really teach myself to map my body and learn exactly where everything is positioned in the body, the organs, their connection to the energy systems, the chakra bodies. And so I didn't learn the chakras by reading a book or by seeing the chart. I actually learned it by looking at the body because I had no idea really what that was at that time. I had a very vague idea. But I began to notice where emotions store in the body. And so eventually creating an entire map of the body. And so that made me really curious and kind of go back into more research about that. And I went back to school. I became a pranic healer, energy healer, because pranic energy is focused on an entire energetic anatomy of the body. So what I discovered is that everything I was seeing in the body, they were mapping already in these pranic healing classes. I mean, this is Taoist energy structures. What is it called? The energy systems in the body, such as meridian lines, and what the map that they were using for acupuncture, right? all of that was exactly the result of an intuitive, deep connection with our body. And so it overlapped exactly what I was seeing in myself and my students. So our spiritual biology, our spiritual biology and our alchemy, basically your body, what I discovered is that the body is a multidimensional system. It's a bioelectrical system of memory. And every single organ in your body, every cell in the body, every part of the body is holding it's every organ is oscillating. It has its own toroidal field. It oscillates at a very specific frequency. That frequency is is operating at certain ranges. It processes specific information. So in a quick example, the liver is known to house anger. So when we have a strong suppression or resistance to anger, we end up having complications in the liver. And it can be a range of complications. It depends on many layers of the emotion, what other emotions are connected to that, right? And so, yeah, so you kind of start mapping this kind of emotional system. It's a biochemical emotional system that we can reverse, we can alchemize, we can heal the body when we understand where information stores in the body. And what is alchemy? Alchemy is uh, basically the ancient art of transmuting raw metals into pure gold, right? So how do you do that? Through the body, changing one form of energy into a higher form of energy. So every emotion is a bandwidth of frequency. It creates a bandwidth of frequency. Very slow moving bandwidth is a very slow, long, heavy wave. Higher bandwidths are very fast moving and short. They're fast and short waves. So there's a difference. The body is a self-organizing intelligence that will intelligently process each of those different waves in different parts of the body. This is how you store memory. This is how you also block your bioelectricity, because when the body is in harmonic order and when we process emotions fluidly, life force can move in a circular motion. So a couple of things. The body is also a toroidal system. It's a toroidal energy system. And so anything blocking that toroidal pathway down the central channel is going to lessen your bioelectricity. What blocks that flow? Thought forms, which are a product of emotional stagnation or resistance, and also the ignorance of our own emotions, the resistance to feel, the resistance to know, avoidance of ourselves. And essentially, the human ends up operating at a very, very small percentage of their potential. Our vision is basically just right here. It's whatever's in front of us. We don't even pay attention to the back of our body. We don't pay attention to anything. And your entire body is your potential. So if your mind is only right here, or it's only like looking at your cell phone all the time, you're completely disconnected from an entire realm of potential that you have access to. So it's a really huge thing that we need to pay attention to, because um, it's like you're using not even like less than a tenth of your potential, of your brain's potential. And one of the biggest epidemics that we have in our society today is that we're deeply disconnected. We deeply don't want to feel anything. We want to be numb. We don't want to feel truth. We don't want to feel our emotions. We don't want to go through that process, because it would require a reorganization of a lot of things, so I'll stop there in case you want to ask anything.
Well, actually, I had two questions come from that. One, just for my personal clarification, when you're talking about like the prana energy and the energy in the body, is that the same thing or similar to like the chi that you hear about in Eastern medicine, where they can heal the body with the chi energy and they can start to like build muscle strength and do all these amazing feats because of the chi energy?
Yeah, so chi and prana, it just simply means life force. And we are in an ocean of life force. The air that we breathe is a life force. The emotions that we feel are a life force. The nature that is around us is a life force. And so, yes, we can intentionally, the most important link is intention. Because if we're not clear about the intention, it's hard for us to redirect that life force to the parts of the body that are necessary to heal. So if you have a clear intention, and a word on intention, intention can be distorted by subconscious belief systems. So if on the external you have this desire to heal, but internally you don't believe in yourself, you don't really have a lot of belief or doubt in it, that is the emotion that will primarily take over your intention, and you don't realize how much. And so that's why for some people this kind of healing doesn't work. There's a process to it. You have to get very in harmonic order, in alignment with integrity, with your beliefs and your core values, and then that's how you become a master of life force, chi, prana. You know how to direct that energy. So there's many ways that we can use the body to clean up energy, to purify energy, because anything that is too stagnant or has been resisted or abandoned in the body, it moves slow, and eventually it's in the process and the direction of illness and death. So the opposite is the creation. Both of these, death and life, they're both creative energies in some way, right? Because even death, it creates in nature, it creates a putrefaction process, right? And from there, there's billions of organisms that are thriving in that. So this is also something that it's a paradox that we have to kind of learn when it comes to energy and pranic healing like this. All energy is important, it's valuable, and no energy is eliminated. It's never deleted, it's never eliminated totally. It's just transmuted, it's changed in its form. So if we can understand our intention behind what we're doing and have clear intention, we can direct the energy where it needs to go inside the body, basically.
Perfect. And before I ask the second question, a question came in the chat room, and so I want to address it since
Yeah.
it's in the flow of what we're talking about. And they're asking, could that be from trauma?
Yeah, so if you're referring to the blockage of life force, absolutely. Because most of the reason why we don't want to move life force or feel or numb ourselves from emotions is because it's become too overwhelming. We just simply don't know how. Trauma is simply the inability to know how to respond to something. So imagine your brain has a filing cabinet of all the experiences that you've had. When you experience a traumatic thing, and you look into that filing cabinet, you don't find a matching experience. There's a disassociation that occurs. And this is where you go into survival, fight, flight, or freeze, right? You either want to freeze, you flight, because you don't know where to pull the information from. And so what happens is that the body can store that shock that you experience, that distortion, and it creates this disassociation with the body. So sorry, is that,
That's not me.
what is it? Is it,
Something's going through my mic. I don't know. I'm watching my mic activate, and my mouth's not moving.
that is so weird. What was it saying?
I couldn't make it out. It sounded like a call or
Yeah,
somebody talking. My friend says aliens, ha ha ha.
that's hilarious.
And then she said, I also think that many people don't even realize they have trauma. It's a life they've always had, it's generational.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute, because trauma doesn't necessarily have to be an extremely traumatic event. It doesn't have to be like a car accident or a loss of a parent or a loved one. It can be something so simple, like when you were a child, your mom didn't turn around and look at you when you were playing. Just that simple little disconnect where you had an expectation and that expectation wasn't met can cause a disassociation. And so the invitation really is that you want to kind of, you can return back to these experiences, and you can inform your former self, your younger self, equip that child with the tools that it needed to navigate that experience. And it's really powerful. But in the process of moving your perception from the victim or the one that was disconnected or lost, because remember that these experiences, they are what form our personality. They are what we build our clothing choices around them, our how our relationship patterns. the careers that we choose are all around that. And a lot of people find themselves in their 40s or 50s having crises because they end up realizing this is not my life. This is not the life that I wanted. It's not, I don't even know what I want. Why? Because you have a lot of parts of yourself that you've never allowed yourself to feel. So this, as you can see, we have generations of that kind of behavior, right? We have generations of mom and dad that have never reached their peak of creativity or freedom or potential or whatever it is, and that's passed down through generations. So what happens is that we adopt that as truth, and it becomes a filter of perception. The problem is that we're full of filters of perceptions, and in addition to that, we live in a society that capitalizes on those. So if for some reason you have generations of women that feel unworthy, the society capitalizes on that. Okay, well, here's your job. You're going to get married, you're going to have babies, you're going to maybe get an education, you're not going to make as much as your partner. All these little programs that they put right into these structures of society. And so it more blocks in that trauma, those belief systems, those filters of reality that we begin to process. So the first step is to deprogram basically all of those belief systems so that you can begin to move outside of that.
Which is perfect because it actually leads into my second question, and that was I've kind of based my life through my experiences and everything. Kind of the closest way I could describe it would be Jedi, to where like anger, resentment, all those emotions, it's like I know they're there, but I don't give them awareness or space to be, expressed. I'm like, because I've learned nothing really comes of it in my experiences. Like, I could get angry about something someone says, but in the end, it's the calm conversation about it that really clears the air, not the anger. And so, am I doing a disservice to myself by not addressing that anger and getting that out, and instead waiting till I'm in a calm place and have a calm conversation?
That's an amazing question. And I would come back to that question by, have you ever let yourself feel angry? Have you ever actually let yourself feel those emotions fully?
I have on occasion, and like I'll scream just to let out the emotional charge. And yes, I feel better, but at the same time, though, I'm not screaming at someone, I'm not addressing it towards anyone. I'm just basically just kind of tilt my head up and just let it go to the universe. And I'm like, here, you guys do with this what you want. I don't need it. Have at it, kind of persona, instead of like going up to the person that's done something and being, okay, I'm going to be in your face about this and this and this, because to me, I feel like it doesn't do the justice of what your intention in that moment is. And I mean, yes, you're upset about this, but what does it do to scream at somebody versus having that calm conversation and saying, look, it really hurt me that you did this. It really upset me you did this. And that's
And
where I think the growth is. And so it's like, yes, I scream out, but not directly at someone in that moment. I'll do it later if I need to.
well, here's the thing. The fact that we even want to scream already tells us that somewhere within us is a part that is unheard, a part that has not been acknowledged at some point, either now or later, or before or in the past. And that part deserves to be heard, because what happens is that that part starts to accumulate over and over again, the suppression of the anger. And one of the things that is really important for humanity to understand is that we have free will. We don't understand that we even have free will. What is free will? Free will is the ability to tap into infinite creative potential. We have way more creative power than we understand, but most of that is tied up in the ignorance of how we function as humans. What are emotions? Emotions are information. They're very important. Never ignore an emotion because it's telling you something that you need to pay attention to. And most of our power is tied up in the emotions that we haven't met. So if you can allow yourself to pause, and this is, when I first started doing this practice, it was weird because, people were angry, whatever, reacting, and I would just kind of stop, and it would look like I checked out, but I was checking in with myself, or I was checking in with what I was feeling in that moment and why I wanted to respond the way I was responding. And in that moment, this is something that you want to practice in meditation on your own for several hours before you practice it in person, because you need to understand what you're doing. But you sit with the emotion, and emotions are multi-layered. It's never just one emotion. That's the thing about emotion that's so valuable. Information, right? So if you feel the anger, and underneath that anger, you sit with the anger, and all of a sudden you start to notice, oh, what's in that anger? It's like, it's frustration, it's abandonment, it's fear, it's loss, things like this. Now every single one of those emotions that you named out, it's how you learned to feel anger. It's how you learn to suppress anger. Each one of these emotions is a memory and experience of your life that caused you anger that was unresolved. So you can go down that list. So in that anger is that frustration. Okay, that was like last month, mom did this or husband did this. Okay, what else? Then underneath that, there's this abandonment, right? Okay, when I was a child, always getting abandoned, not being heard, and no one to ask for help. So that means that we have a lot of that anger has never been met, never been addressed. And what happens is that these emotions create filters of perception of yourself, what you're capable of, and also what you're worthy of. And that's a problem, because we end up wearing these masks of certain ideas about ourselves that are super limited. And we keep meeting the same mom and dad that left us, partner that hurt us, so on and so forth. We keep meeting the same person everywhere we go. So, of course, you don't have free will, because all you're doing is you're repeating those cycles in your life over and over, meeting the same people, the same dramas, the same pain, the same triggers. So the human that can tap into its infinite potential takes a deep look at those things and becomes free from them. They take a look at that little inner child that was abandoned, and you are there for them. You provide them with compassion, support, protection, and you learn how to feel protected. You learn how to feel present with yourself. And so the next time that person says something to trigger you, to anger you, it's like it's not there anymore because you don't feel that way. There's nothing for them to attack anymore in you. We actually are very fragile when we're super disconnected with our emotions. And that's a difference. One thing is to be authentic and genuine. Another thing is to be fragile. Fragile can be easily broken.
And it's interesting you bring up authentic because, let's see, Jason Van, I think it's Luvian, I hope I pronounced that right, 906, is asking an interesting question because everybody has a different definition. And he's asking, what does authenticity and transparency mean?
Yeah. So authenticity means that you meet yourself and you're 100% honest with yourself. Why do you do things? What drives your intentions? What drives your reactions to things? And you're honest about that. Most people, they behave in certain ways, and first of all, they don't realize how they harm other people, but they also don't realize how they're harming themselves. And so that kind of numbness is just, we just block that out because it doesn't feel good. We also don't know how to handle it. So we then are constantly wearing masks, right? Because we don't know how to do the work to find out why we feel that way or why we cause that way in others. We just protect ourselves from the truth, our own truth. So one of the most powerful aspects of this kind of emotional alchemy and bioelectrical alchemy is that we have to change our relationship with truth. For a lot of people, truth is very, it seems very threatening. Why? Because you're going to have to dismantle many comfort parts of you that you have become very comfortable with. And there's another layer to that, that we're also biochemically addicted to certain states of being. For example, the victim role can be a person that has been, striving all their life. They feel that they've always been doing the right thing, but they always get the wrong end of the stick. And they say they want to change, but in reality, they like being in that place because they have this kind of sense of righteousness, this false sense of righteousness that somehow, they are doing the right thing and trying, but everyone else is doing the wrong thing. So there's a little part of that ego that has been wounded at some point that needs to be nurtured, needs to be shown. What is it if you would embody your empowerment? What does it look like if you were to embody your worth? Now you got to take responsibility, full responsibility. You can't blame anyone else. And that's what a lot of people, they get intimidated by that. They're afraid of that. So, that's why never see a book and judge it, right? Because it's in the sub layers, it's the under layers. And a lot of things are like that in our world. There's a lot of social engineering that kind of makes us believe certain things are really amazing. Like even in our spiritual community, if you're dressed in white and you look very spiritual, you want to follow this person, but you don't know. You don't know if this person is truly aligned with themselves. Are they in harmonic order? Are they truthful? So we got to kind of change our perceptions. And to find truth in this spiritual journey, you're either searching for truth or you're searching for love, because one of these two ways is gonna lead you to the end, to the truth, to peace and harmony, really. If you're doing a spiritual journey for anything other than those two things, you're going to lose your way very quickly.
Well, and as we're talking about society and everything, I feel like society has kind of damaged how we look at emotions and deal with them because, and I'll clarify for a second, when I talk about emotions, I view it as energy in motion.
Mhm.
So when I say emotion, that's what I'm referring to. And you'll sit there and you want to stand in your power, you want to stand who you are, but then you hear terms like toxic femininity, toxic masculine, toxic anger, or you're coming off as being toxic energy. So people start pulling in and are like, nope, I'm not going to experience that, I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to be toxic, I don't want to be labeled toxic. So how can we walk that fine line of expressing without coming off as toxic?
You got to be more committed to your own truth than to approval, period. Because right now, the reason why the society is the way it is because we have valued the approval of others, and that's a survival mechanism. We believe that if we don't get the approval of others, we will be ostracized and pushed out of society. And that's the age old story, even from the witches, right? The witches, all the alchemists of history, all those that have gone anywhere outside the lines is taken out of society. So that's a deep collective trauma that is it's used for control, mass mind control. And we are programmed because when we watch films or shows, they are telling you how you're supposed to feel, why you're supposed to feel that way. And it's super inverted from the reality. So, first thing we got to do is, again, take back our power. How? By reconnecting with your body and really taking a look at your relationship with your own emotions. If you're not connected to your emotions, you don't have intuition, you don't have good discernment, and you don't have the ability to have free will. So that's right there. It's like three main things that are the foundation of human sovereignty. And how many people have taken the time to do that work? So when you connect with your emotions, you're no longer, when you heal those little inner child, inner wounds, little inner egos that are striving for love, there's no evil person on this planet. And that may seem controversial, but even the most seemingly evil person inside, its core desire is to unify with the whole, with the divine. And it does that by seeking love in maybe twisted, messed up ways, doing things that make them feel things biochemically. All of it is to feel loved, acknowledged, those basic human needs. And so the sooner we begin to understand that, we can change our perception of good and bad, good and evil, right? Because there is no good and evil. There's just cause and effect. And some things are to create life, and some things go in the direction of death. And so you get to choose, where do you want to be? The problem also is that our concepts are so inverted, we don't realize how our actions are going in the direction of death. For example, we overconsumption in this world, right? We intoxicate ourselves with alcohol, drugs. We check out. We don't want to feel. We want to numb ourselves. We want to eat junky food that destroys the body. And one of the ways in DNA, understanding holographic DNA, there's a major agenda to destroy DNA. You destroy DNA by many things: chemicals, you destroy it by the foods that are toxic, you destroy it by emotions, right? The loosh, as they call it, the absorption of all your negative emotions, your fear. If you trigger that emotion constantly in society, how can they see beyond their ability to master anything? So this is a major indoctrination we got to see. And the thing is that that destroys DNA, because that trauma is passed down for generations. And these are things that a lot of us that are here incarnated, we have to choose to stop that destruction internally, self-destruction.
It's interesting you point that out, and it got me thinking about something I had talked about on a recent interview with a friend. And we were pointing out Disney and how Disney right now has an agenda of we should feel sorry for the villains. Look at what happened to them to make them the villain. And part of me was like, at first going, they made that choice. That's I don't care what they did to become that, but in what you're saying, it kind of makes sense now in a twisted way what they're doing, and I highly doubt that's what Disney had really intended, but it does put it in a different light of, seeing where they came from and became quote evil when that was not what they set out to be.
Yeah. However, I will add one more thing to that, because everything you said is amazing. In this construct of the matrix, remember that we are sitting on the construct of duality. As long as you're incarnated on this planet Earth, in this timeline, you're going to experience light and dark. Without that, you would just dissolve into energy. Because in this three-dimensional world, in order for three dimensions to function physically, it needs that construct. It's the marriage of the feminine and masculine. So those people, some people say, oh, we have to eliminate all the evil of the world. That will never happen, because evil is not what we think it is, you know. So 100%. And also look at some of the northern European countries. What have they done with their criminals? Rehabilitation, psychological support, family support, emotional support. And what happened? The crime went down in the society. And you look at the criminals here in the street, trauma, sexual abuse. They were raised in extremely painful families. I have these clients every day, you know. So and we have that in us. You see, this is where we start to shift into unity consciousness. The reason why we're so divisive and separate right now is because we've compartmentalized our view of everything, which is a big, dangerous thing to do. There is no separation. There is no only love and light. No, it's the real ascension is to become one with all. And that means that you broaden your spectrum of vision into everything, the dark and the light. And the higher you go, the lower you're going to have to go too. So for example, we have these draconian agendas, right? And the draconians, these reptilian draconian agendas, they represent all the most primitive survival aspects of humanity. They have ritual things like these files, for example, that now it's coming to light, things that we've known for a very long time, very dark things, right? The inversion of life force, pure life force, sexual energy. You invert that. You fractalize a soul. That's the fastest way to fractalize a soul. For what? To become deeply entangled in the matrix. So this is something that we need to understand. All of these dark arts are the manipulation of pure life force. And we need to recognize that we have become very manipulative ourselves. We have seeds of that manipulation. We have seeds of the need for control, power. That's where it comes from. Maybe you just have it a little lesser amount. Jealousy, comparison, possessiveness. That's where it comes from. So none of us is free from those parts.
And I find it interesting as we're talking about, balancing and everything. The term that I find coming up a lot and being like in the forefront for the movement or whatever you want to call it, shadow work. And to me, I came to the realization this year or late last year, it was kind of blended together, but shadow is your dark side with your light side. It's the balance of both. And how I describe it is if the shadow had no light, you would not know it was in a dark room. But because you can see it walk by, you can see the light against the darkness. And so, therefore, the shadow is both in one essence. So, when we're doing our shadow work, we're doing the work on our dark side and our light side in one event. And so, I just find it interesting how I came to that realization. And then hearing you just now talking about that, it's like, yeah, that's shadow work.
That's so beautiful, Michael. Absolutely. And see, it's really through the shadow work that you can even understand these concepts, because you can hear them, you don't really get them until you actually do the work. It's a whole different thing. And also, when we talk about spiritual biology, when you do the work, it changes completely your anatomy of your body. That's why spirituality, you can't, there's no quick way to do it. There's no quick fix or anything. It's a complete restructuring of how light moves through the body, to the point where you begin to come into harmonic order. You open blocked pathways of light, and those pathways of light, they can create pretty complex geometric patterns, like the Merkaba, for example. So your energy of your body, when it's in a constant state of depletion, right? You're a vampire. You want to get from you, your whole goal is to get from the external to fill the void internally. So your energy is centrifugal. Okay. When you are centripetal and you gather your energy, your attention now has come to the internal self, to your emotion. You do the shadow work. Now you become magnetic. Now you can manifest. Now you can heal your body. Now you can become intuitive. So it's just a complete inversion of how you're reverting back into harmonic order, all the inversions of the depletion of your life force.
It kind of reminds me of that story in a way that the native indigenous people talk about with the two wolves inside of you. One that's like the predator protector, and the other one that's the gentle protector. And it's like, and they say, which one are you? You know, which, well, it depends on which one you feed. And the way I'm looking at it now is both are being fed at the same time. But if you're in a life and death situation, you best hope that that dark protector one comes up that says, yes, I'm going to keep us alive. Versus, you know, if you're just in a heated argument, you best hope the good protector one comes in and says, hey, you know, we're going to keep our cool. We're going to express who we are and we're going to express our feelings, but we're not going to go overboard and let anger control and get caught up in it and create a much bigger scene than's needed. Is
Right.
that kind of along the lines of what you're meaning?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple parts to that. It's really interesting how fear functions biologically, biochemically in the body. There's two ways that we can experience fear in these contracted, like reactionary states, right? In most ways, when we are very fearful, we usually block our senses. And actually, we can be in way more danger in those circumstances because we're so afraid we can't even see what's in front of us. And actually, that's usually what people end up, they're only looking at whatever they're experiencing through the filter of fear, and that blocks a lot of truth. Sometimes when you tell the person calm down and take a look at what are you afraid of, all of a sudden they're like, oh, that's not a monster, it's just a pumpkin, or something like that. It's just something so totally innocent, not dangerous at all. So that's something that we need to kind of revert. But there's another element that also happens. And I go back to this concept of the Jedi, for example. What do the Jedi teach, right? So the Jedi, the one that's in anger, they're only looking at what their anger wants to do. They can't see the full picture. The Jedi, not only do they activate intuition, but they're able to pool resources from around them to survive, to change someone's unconscious behavior, right? That's how they can change the open the door, please. Tell the guy can open the door immediately because he's unconscious. He's in a hypnotic state. But the person, the Jedi acting that way, is fully conscious. So there's what happens is when you are fully connected with your body and you utilize, let's say, the unknown rather than fear, right? Because what is fear? It's the fear of the unknown. That's what we're afraid of. We're afraid of the unknown. When you change your relationship with the unknown and you become curious and explore it, your capacities widen. Not only does your vision widen, but what I've experienced in my life is that my intuition would become super heightened. My ability to know and tap into any possible information became available to me. um, like the Matrix film, where they download the software of the martial arts, right? We can do
Right.
that. We can do that because subconsciously we've absorbed so much information that we do not allow ourselves to become accessible to. But through meditation, through reconnection, through uncovering those programs, we have infinite resource of resources available to us. So yeah, it changes how humans operate, and you don't fear anything basically. There's not even death, which is actually the most powerful freedom. That if you can make sense of death, understand that death is just an energetic transition point, rather than the finite of your consciousness. It's only the end of the body. You no longer fear, and you can experience all kinds of things in life.
And it's interesting, you know, as you were talking about that, I started replaying like some of the Star Wars Jedi scenes in my mind, and I was like, you know, when they're in combat doing the lightsaber duels, there's anger on both sides. You can see it in their motion, the movement of their bodies and everything. But the difference is the Jedi, when they've determined who's won the duel, puts the blades away and is like, okay, now that we're done with that, you know, let's move on and let's do what we're doing. They let it go. they view it as done. Where the Sith or the dark side is like, oh no, you beat me. Now I have to go and train even harder so that I can beat you. And they just let the anger feed. And I wonder if that's the symbology of, like, I don't know how much into Star Wars you are, but like Anakin, where his eyes got that yellow glow when he started turning to the dark side.
Right.
That's the anger inside that's
Yeah.
like growing and growing and growing because he's not letting it go. Where everybody else is like, they can yell at him, they can get angry at him, but then they let it go. And so they keep their normal look.
Exactly. Amazing. Yeah, that film is, those films are so profound if you look at it with the right eyes. There's so much symbology. I mean, even the color of the eyes. Every time and you see a different shade, it's telling you something. And it correlates to the chakra bodies, right? The eyes turn red, it's the survival part, right? The orange, it's the sacral, the sexual energy, the creative energy, which is the exchange, power and control. So, I mean, yeah, so I guess the difference is that you learn how to harness the energy that comes with that, because it's just energy. The problem is that we get too involved in the emotions and the stories, and because we look at everything separate, we compartmentalize, like injustices, for example. It's very hard to get over injustices, right? Because when we have certain ideals of what is right and wrong, when we feel an injustice, we can just become destroyed by that, because nobody can do justice for you. You think you can. But when
Right.
you connect more with natural law, natural order, universal law, you begin to understand nothing is just like that. Everything always has a cause and effect. And so the wisdom of the Jedi understands that super deeply. And just as you mentioned, there's no reason to feel that anger and dwell in that anger. Anger is a natural emotion that we need to feel. Why? Because again, information. But once you gather the information, you let it move through you. It no longer, it just loses its power in your body. You don't, the only time emotions become so big and so difficult to control is when you're resisting them. So this is the key. Emotions are very short-lived, actually.
And I think evidence of that too comes from society, to where how many times when we were growing up as kids, and I don't know this generation, they're in a world of their own, but our generation, like somebody would make a funny comment and somebody would get into your ear and say, "Are you going to let them get away with that?" And then you would respond in kind, and then somebody would be in their ear and going, "Are you going to let them get away with that comment?" So it's like there was always somebody in our ear that was goading us to get more angry, to get more into the emotion than if those voices were never there. And, people made comments and they were like, yeah, that wasn't a cool comment, but okay, whatever, and move on. Life would be so much better. But we had those elements that are always in the ear saying, you're going to let them get away with that. And I think that's where we learned how not to process emotions right, because we constantly hear that voice and going, are you going to let them say that to you like that? Are you going to let them do that to you? And you're like, no. And I got to stand up for myself. And you go into the wrong energy because you're reactive instead of responsive.
That's right. Yeah, and you bring up such an interesting point, because remember that that only works if you question your self-worth, right? It only works if you believe that you are defined by other people's actions. So in that is like a huge like conditioning that we have been conditioned. And I'll tell you, one thing that plays a huge role in that is religious concepts, right? The idea of sin and good, right and wrong. That for many centuries humanity has been enslaved trying to do good, be, the good, Christian, and things like this. I was also raised in that thinking. And it was a very hard one to break because I was like, it plays on your shame, it plays on your guilt, it plays on your unworthiness. So it's really important to understand yourself, your indoctrination. How have you been indoctrinated? Because people that are very deeply indoctrinated are extremely easy to manipulate. So easy. So the other thing that the Jedi masters is the observer, right? Because the observer does not react. He just watches everything. And that pause and that ability to observe before reaction allows them to really get clarity on their role that they're playing there. And they don't fall into any kind of manipulation of any kind, you know? And so if you understand, and that's something that we need to understand powerfully right now, that every human we are intrinsically worthy. We are intrinsically valuable. That there's no question about that. There's no question about how valuable, how important, how divine, how sacred, how important you are to the collective evolution. So we need to remember that. And that's how we can easily come back into harmonic order quickly. Because when you satiate those parts of us that are wounded, that feel incomplete, unworthy, unnecessary, not good, ugly, not perfect, you can sweep away a lot of unnecessary pain, suffering, and deviations out of your power, you know? So our power is harnessed through love. That is the highest alchemy. And that's what unconditional love is. Love is not an emotion. It's the deprogramming of conditioning of separation from you on every level. And when you deprogram that, you see yourself as whole. You can see your anger, understand its information, what you need to know, its protection, its understanding. You see your love and you understand why you need that. And that's the wisdom of the human.
Yeah, and it brings up an interesting point too. Is not to get on Star Trek or not Star Trek, Star Wars too much, but there's one moment in the movies that has always left me puzzled, and that is when Order 66 comes through, and all the Jedi are taken by surprise and killed by their troops that they're with in the Clone Wars. And I always thought that was so bizarre because they're so aware of everything around them and their environment. I feel like they would have known when that happened and be able to get out and get away, but yet none of them really do. And it's like I've always thought that that doesn't line up with who and what they are. How would they be blindsided like that?
Well, if you watch carefully to the archetypes in the film, the Jedi in the film, they're good, but there's also a lot of greedy ones. There's also the ones that are looking for power. There's also the ones that are looking, right? So that's a perfect example that when these systems start to become like that, you can't see what's going to happen to you. And we also have a lot of trauma around trust, right? Because we tend to kind of rest in the laurels of our spiritual understanding, but we have to understand that actual real spiritual growth is to be constantly living in unknown, constantly living in paradox, constantly being able to evolve, because the whole point is pure experience. If you think about your life, that it's just an experience and the value is the experience, you're not going to look for validation. You're not going to look to be protected, to be saved. You're also not going to question all the bad choices you've made in your life. You will learn from them. You will take what you need and move and choose better for yourself very proactively. So, in this example, there's a lot of betrayal going on there. And that's one of the most difficult lessons in spirituality. Who do we betray? Ourselves, because our values begin to change. They begin to get shifty, So the question is, and it's a very good example, that if your values are not aligned with your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, your abilities start to dull down. Your psychic abilities, telepathic, remote viewing, you just can't tap into those six senses anymore. So a real light worker always has to be in authenticity, in the line of truth in harmonic order in order to actually have access to true information. Anything else is the ego speaking through, and that's something that we have to kind of be aware of nowadays because we have so many channelers, for example, and you have to listen very carefully to the messages because the messages can seem very amazing, but you have to listen very carefully, sometimes inversions of truth there, and you take it as reality. So the ego is a funny thing, always tends to get, it wants to get, the limelight. It can happen to anyone.
Hmm. And as you were talking about religion, I had a funny experience when I was a kid that came back as a teenager in high school that actually got me removed from a Bible study class that my girlfriend was in, and I called them on a lot of their discrepancies, and I go, here's your first one. So Jesus died on the cross to abolish sin. Abolish means it's no more. How do we have sin now? So if we have sin now, you're saying he died on the cross for nothing. And that did not sit well. And then I try to show how scenarios in the Bible were showing how Jesus had a wife. And yeah, needless to say, all of that combined is why I was asked never to come back to Bible study because and to me, I'm like, it makes perfect sense. Why is this such a controversy? Why, can we not have those conversations where everyone gets super defensive because you challenge religion, but in essence, religion is not a core belief. It's just a way of life, but somewhere it became something else, in my opinion.
100%. I mean, religion, organized religion, is indoctrination. And so that's something that we have to be very, very clear about because what is being indoctrinated to there are untruths or incomplete truths. I was raised learning about many religions because my parents were studying many different religions as I grew up. They were everything from, Buddhist to Zen to Zoroastrian to, I mean, you name it, Taoist, Christian, Catholic, right? That's where my family's originally Catholic, Gnosticism. So, I mean, I had the opportunity to see all of these sacred books, read them, study them. And what I discovered later on during my own work in meditation, accessing the field where all the information became available at once, that all religions on earth are incomplete on purpose. And it's very interesting because really only the person that breaks away from the cookie cutter of the doctrine can really understand and see beyond that. And it's a parallel to the matrix, right? When you're in the matrix, you follow and abide the matrix rules and laws, and you're in a dormant state, you're in hypnosis, you can't see the truth. So it's a lot of inversions of truth are taught by religions. The only way that you can break away by that is by connecting with natural order, with coming back to nature, connecting with nature. What does that mean? Your human nature, your true connection, your true emotions, your authentic self, the one that is not programmed by anything, the one that is the pure observer, and the one that has the direct connection to the infinite wisdom since you were in the womb. You always had the wisdom. It was just covered with programs as you grew up. So the sooner we come back to that divine essence of yourself, you can very quickly see the inversions of truth in these religions and doctrines and practices, rituals that are actually designed to block the human from accessing that divine infinite connection that is innate to them. And I'm kind of, it's a sweeping, I'm very aware that it's a kind of a sweeping um, statement that I'm making. but we don't have time to go into the intricacies. I mean, we could go through every religion and take a look at step by step how it's done. But in general, I think one thing I would advise is always pay attention to when a religion or a group or a guru or a channeler or anyone is telling you to look outside of yourself for anything, any answer, any truth, any healing. Because immediately right there, it's an inversion of natural order. So we have to change that. And your attention, everything you need is inside of you. You can heal your body. You can access infinite truth. You can see anything because you can open your intuitive capacities. So um, we have to become sovereign and really anchor into that power that we have, that infinite potential. You are the God that has been demonstrated to you, Jesus, all of his beautiful powers and abilities, you have them. They're in you. You just have to embody that unconditional love. So there's a lot of truths in these religions, but you have to know which ones are true. The only way you're going to be able to tap into that is by looking inside yourself.
Right. And I often find it interesting how religion, when it started, we were all children of God. We were all his children. So we're all the sons and daughters. Then at some point it became Jesus is the only child of God on earth, and we are now second, and we were stripped of our divine birthright, and everyone seems to be okay with that. And I find that so bizarre that they can blindly accept what the Bible says, even though it doesn't make sense. And a prime example of what I'm talking about, even more clear, is you look at Adam and Eve, and and we'll skip Lilith for a moment, but Adam and Eve have two kids, Cain and Abel, two guys, and all of a sudden, when they leave Eden, what happens? Cain and Abel get married. Where did these women come from? Because we're told Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel are the only four people on the planet, but all of a sudden they marry women from other tribes. Nobody sits there and says, wait, where did these tribes come from? What? How did these other tribes come about? Because there's nobody. And all of a sudden now there's four plus a whole lot more, but we're just going to say, okay, they got married. Great. The lines go on and we're all descending from that. And those are the kind of the moments where I sit there and go, do you realize you just blindly accepted that there's nobody on this planet except four people, and now all of a sudden there's six or more because you have women from other tribes that just appears out of nowhere.
Oh boy, yep. Then we'd have to go down the conversation of right, the origin of man.
Right.
They definitely don't want to have that conversation.
And so, it's like moments like that, it's like the story that they're telling doesn't make sense, but yet everybody's heard it so many times. They're like, it's the story, it's the true story. And it's like, no, it
Yeah.
can't be the true story because the story doesn't make sense.
Well, I think also like there's tremendous amount of symbology in these stories. So I think also we need to learn how to understand the stories because just like for centuries, all the ancient civilizations passed down stories, right? Stories which had truths, but only those that could see could really understand and recognize those truths. So these stories, just even as you say them, they have some truth, but you have to understand how to read into that, right? So yeah, I think our perception changes, but we cannot take it as face value, because if we take information just as it is, that's you just being in dormant state, accepting whatever information is being downloaded into you, you know. It's discernment.
That's
You need to have discernment and question.
that's true, and you can also look at Eve is blamed for eating the apple from the tree and getting Adam and her kicked out of Eden, and I'm like, that's the punishment for eating from the tree of knowledge when you were told not to. But Cain killing Abel, he gets this mark and becomes immortal to always walk the earth. And I always thought that was strange because God's killing people left and right. And so, what's he doing any different than he is? And how is that more of a thing than eating fruit from a tree that contains wisdom and knowledge, and your only punishment is you're exiled from a garden? I always thought that was a little off. Like, the level of what happened to the crimes was off and didn't kind of go in alignment. It's like, it doesn't seem right for some reason.
Well, yeah, but you see, the representation of that is that he basically tasted matter, material, and he went towards material. So basically, he married into the matrix, right? He wanted the matrix, he wanted the physical experience. So there's a lot of symbology there, tremendous amount of symbology. Whereas the wisdom, that wisdom that comes from the tree of life, is the innate direct connection to the divine. He rejected that. He went towards the matter. And so therefore the matrix is evolved. And now you have a world of matter, a world of physical sensations, a world of contrast and duality, where the other side is wholeness. Everything comes from one. So there's like so much symbology. So you really would have to like listen to those stories, and you could talk for hours about each one of them, but it's not literal. What is happening? There's way so much symbology behind that.
Right. And I like Michael Dank. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Uncle who? No,
Dank.
no, no.
Um, he has a presentation where he shows the Bible is encoded to the zodiac. And when you look at it that way, the stories make more sense because, like, shepherds tending their flock in the winter would never happen because the sheep are not out grazing in the snow.
Hmm.
So this parable makes no sense, but when you look at it under the zodiac terms, it's like, wait a minute, I now understand what they're talking about because the story makes sense all of a sudden. And so I think, we look and we take so much stuff at face value because it's what someone tells us it's right. And to me, I kind of think that's where religion somewhat lost its way, is when we said, oh, we have to talk to the priest or the bishop or the pope to hear what this book really says because I'm not smart enough to understand it myself. And so, yeah, we started listening to other people's interpretations of it and lost our way.
Yeah. Well, religion in itself is organized. Okay. Just the origin of religion, from the history, the origin of time, it's an organized, structurally created indoctrination system for the purpose of control. And that's all religions. All religions have an origin point. And when those religions, when they branched out, immediately they became married to the political system for a very, very purposeful reason. So any true wisdom, any true information, all the ancient books, like esoteric books, for example, of the church, which they did exist at some point, were quickly eliminated because all of those that would help the human reach divine connection on their own was a threat, right? So what we do is we immediately make it so that the human has to depend on a priest or a Jesus or a Buddha or something outside of them that is directing how to behave. How do you create social order? Is that you merge church and state. And so there, that's how, we have an entire centuries of control in our world that have manipulated stories and concepts in order to create distortion of harmonic order.
And I just realized something with America as the example is we had indigenous tribes or Native American tribes, whatever you want to call them, and they were matriarchal and they were thriving in any condition. Europeans come in and they're a patriarchal system and they wipe out or try to wipe out the matriarchal system. And I've often, and I never realized that until now, like the symbology of that and going, how was the matriarchal such a threat to the patriarchal that
Tremendous.
even like you're saying, every book that was removed had the matriarchal side,
Exactly.
and they were like, nope, we got to expunge that instead of the balance of what was there, patriarchal and matriarchal. So, why do you feel the matriarchal is such the threat?
Well, the divine feminine is the womb, right? She's the vessel from which life is created. That's huge. It's the direct channel to the divine. And in all the ancient civilizations, I mean, actually, even Europe had matriarchal, right? Uh, Groups like Druids, for example, they used to have all the virgins were direct channels to the divine. That's where we get a lot of those rituals of the divine, Virgin Marys and that kind of thing comes from these kinds of ancient rituals, not originating in the Druids, but even before that, ancient Egypt and so on and so forth, all the way back. Um, and so, in order for a patriarchal system to work, when church married state, um, the man, right, which is the one that builds the matrix, is the one that has to be in power. Because as soon as you start giving power to the feminine, that's when intuition starts to come online. You can't control intuition. You can't control vision. They tried, right, with the witches. That's why we burned the witches immediately, because they were the ones that were using plants, herbs to heal. You no longer have to be dependent on the state. So that's a problem. You're no longer dependent on the church. So you want to eliminate that immediately, because that's the direct connection to nature and natural order. And again, just as you said, it's the balance. When the feminine and masculine are in balance, the human can become whole. What is the human when they're whole? They're like a God being. They're an embodiment, a fractal of Jesus, a fractal of the universe, the Son of Jesus, right? So we become an embodiment of that divine ability. So the quicker that's suppressed, the easier it is to strip the human of their complete self, of their complete knowledge. And all we have, what did we do? We put the women into, basically, she's just the one that produces the air. Centuries and centuries, the women had absolutely no say other than their job is to produce the air. Whether it's a royal lineage or even just a regular family, the women were less than all the time. For what reason? Because you produce the male, and that practice, even up until recently, is still being practiced in some Asian countries, many countries around the world. So we need to heal from that. And so what's happening now is the healing of the divine feminine. So not only is it healing in a metaphoric aspect, in a deep spiritual, but biological, bioelectrically in the body and in the earth of the planet Earth, the vibrational frequency is coming to the point where you can't suppress the feminine anymore. That's why we've had, these files come up. That's why we had all these dark arts of sexual abuse come up, because the inversion of the divine feminine is sexual abuse, right? Because it's the womb. The feminine is the womb. When you abuse that, you cause major disruption in the entire ecosystem of creation. So this is something that we're healing from. We're healing from these wars. We're healing from famine, from when rape and wars are taking place on certain lands, remember the earth itself has its own ley lines. It has its own energy system. So that energy starts to make the earth die. And this has been something that a lot of the Druids practiced this a lot. They were dowsing for water and energy runways that were most in alignment. All the churches practice this. They put their churches in the best energy system, you know? And so when you maintain an entire society in ignorance of these natural arts, this is how you come into power. And we're waking up from that finally. And it's very important that we kind of unite, especially in the spiritual community, because there's so much confusion in the spiritual with so much information everywhere. People are just starting to lose track of what is really divine order. Um, and hopefully try not to create a new religion, right? We have to try to move away from that organized religion back into the sovereignty of each individual to cultivate their divine connection. That's the true power. And we're shifting from the need to control things into creativity. Right now, with the AI revolution, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. People are going to be asking, okay, what is my purpose now? And this is the design of the healing of the divine feminine, because now you heal creativity. We have severed men and women from being creative for centuries. We said you can't create, you only have to produce. And so what happens? We feel super lost, disconnected. So we're going to have to heal a lot of parts about ourselves in order to fully come into our, our potential, basically.
Right. And an example of that too is like I was raised, women had intuition, men had no intuition. They
Yeah,
just had a gut. And I was
sure.
like, I always thought that was interesting. And I'm kind of curious, when we talk about like the 0 point where everything comes in and that's the point of origin almost. For us, our 0 point, would that be where the divine feminine, divine masculine, the light side, dark side, every aspect of ourselves are in balance and in total alignment? Would that be the 0 point? And that's what we're going back towards and refinding?
Yeah, exactly. So in when you think of the alchemical marriage, what is it? It's the feminine and masculine becoming one in order to produce the third. We are the third. Our creative potential is the third. When I say creative, what do I mean? It's not an art project. It's basically your pure experience. Your life as an experience. Can you live your life as a pure experience in harmony with your free will? Okay, so that requires no longer fearing death, not fearing being only right and wrong, being able again to live in that paradox and in the unknown. So the only part of you that can handle that potential, that lack of control, seemingly, is the observer. The one that is not attached to the death of the body, the one that is not attached to pain or pleasure, the one that's not attached to any one identity of itself. All it understands that it's all and nothing simultaneously, and that's when we can actually become whole. Because it's very easy for us in our spiritual work to encounter aspects, higher aspects of ourselves, and then we become enamored by them, identified by them, and we think that's it, I've reached the top. And that's like a little death, because you're limiting your potential, you're limiting your ability to see everything as a whole. The more you see yourself as pure energy and the observer, the easier it's going to be for you to include all of your aspects and integrate them in yourself. And the result of that is a body that is highly conductive. Okay, so what happens when you come into the 0 point is that you start to spin fast and fluidly. Why? Your entire toroidal energy system is spinning, moving life force in a fluid manner without constriction. You become centripetal. You gather your life force and you intentionally create from that point. So you are a magnetic powerhouse. You're attracting people, places, and things that are in harmony with your purpose. Your purpose is not one healing job or one way of being. It can be anything that is in alignment with harmonic order, that is in alignment with core universal laws. Why? Because they're the most self-sustaining. They are the ones that produce longevity in the body, health in the body, life. It's life-giving. So anything that is contractive and depleting, it's life-taking. Everything that is creative, it's life-giving. So that's always a good way to kind of check in with yourself to see if your discerning is correct. Is your choice life-giving or not? That's a quick way to see. And the more we become life-giving, you actually become very productive little cell of this beautiful organism called Mother Earth. And you come into coherence, not only with your brothers and sisters that are also to be of service to the collective healing, right? Because the opposite is self-serving, right? Self-serving is you're in survival, you're fearful, you just want to have pleasure or pain, whatever you're, after. It's a self-serving intention. The opposite of that is to become self-healing, you service to others. So the 0 point is the point of observer, non-judgmental observer, from which unconditional love emerges. And bioelectrically, you become highly conductive. Biochemically, you come into a coherent state of a nervous system that's regulated. Your organs are operating at an optimum state. Everything is working cohesively. You're not in illness or stagnation or pain. And you are able to come back to a childlike state of play, basically. That's something that not a lot of people talk about. To be in the 0 point, you're kind of flowing with life in a state of play. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't some fabricated, immature, just lost in your senses and, state of being. Because there's like a confusion. Some people are like, I'm in a state of play. I'm like a child. That's not it. It's imagine you're a child that is super wise and super responsible. You understand that your creations have cause and effect, and you take full responsibility for your creations. It's a whole different game. So if you can play with that kind of harmonic order, boy, are you living the beautiful life of love, So that's really what that means.
I'm kind of curious with. I'm not sure if you've seen the Star Trek movies, Insurrection,
I've not
where.
seen any Star Trek. I've seen Star Wars, but not Star Trek.
Well, Star Trek has one Insurrection where these people have learned to live a simple life, even though they're technically advanced technology wise.
Mhm.
And there's a scene where one is talking to the captain and she blows on these seeds like a dandelion,
Mhm.
and you can see where they just slowly start to freeze all around and the water stops flowing, and she calls it a moment in time. And I've heard that in metaphysics, you need to live in the moment, this moment, everything is around the moment.
Yeah.
And so as you were talking about the 0 point and everything, I started thinking to myself, is that in reality a moment in time and what we're talking about? And that concept explained and clarified, and that's the goal? Or is it like a stepping stone to the 0 point?
Well, it's an interesting question. First of all, time is a man made construct and it doesn't really exist. Okay. It's just a point of measure. Let me tell you why. Because in reality, everything exists simultaneously to any point in which you are aware. That's it. So anytime you're aware, and trust me, we're not aware all the time. Most of the time, we're like super lost, right? We're not really in the present moment. The present moment is to fully engage in the present completely. So you're fully in your body, you're feeling everything that's in your body, you're completely aware of your surroundings. You're able to feel your surroundings without resisting, without contracting. And in that moment, if you learn how to cultivate your nervous system in that moment, which is the hardest because your body is trained to resist feeling most of the time. And when you're in the present moment, you have to feel. You can't be numb. So to feel everything is the beginning of the gateway into access into much more things, because what most people that are numb don't realize is that we exist in a multidimensional, interdimensional reality. We are constantly moving in and out of dimensions. We're moving out of different timelines. We're choosing different timelines. And so, again, I mentioned we are much more powerful creators than we know. Sometimes there's disembodied souls, ghosts that are hanging out right here next to us in this room, and so the more present you become, the more your range of frequency begins to expand, where you begin to see everything simultaneously. And you can, so in hypnotherapy, we take people back into this hypnotic state where they think they're traveling to past lives, but in reality, these are simultaneous lives available to them right here, right now, based on their vibrational frequency in that moment. So we talk about remote viewing, teleporting, bilocating. All of that is available to you when you enter into the field. And the field is a vibration, it's a wave collapse. You do it through your body. So essentially, we have access to everything in the universe as long as you are fully aware in the present moment. That's the key. It's the portal. Every single one of your chakras is a portal into other dimensions. And so we can use them to access that through the emotional sensory body.
That is very cool and so helpful. And I have so many more questions in mind, but we're at an hour and a half. And so I would say, well, let's just, schedule down the road another episode and keep going down this path, because I feel like we could probably sit here for 2-3 hours talking about this and still be just on the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. It was such an honor to be here with you and your amazing questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming on. And from the heart of my shows and myself, thank you for what you're doing for humanity. It's seen, felt, and heard.
Thank you so much. Likewise. Likewise to you for this amazing platform, by the way. And you put so much work into this. So thank you for spreading the word.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all that you do, because I've seen a lot of your presentations on other shows and everything. And so thank you for sharing all of your wisdom as well.
Thank you.
So we are going to call it a night. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you to the chat room, and thank you for the questions. And please like, subscribe, and follow along, because you never know when we'll be having Geraldine back on for another exciting, fun episode. So with that, we're going to say good night. And so have a great one, everyone. Have a good one.